All right, let's just dive right into it. Today, we're unpacking a rapid-fire explainer on exactly how a scrappy little startup transformed into a multi-billion-dollar sportswear empire. We're talking about the history of Nike, a wild ride full of brilliant innovations, massive controversies, and some really fascinating corporate evolution.
Long before it was a shoe on your foot, Nike was actually the winged Greek goddess of victory. She was the daughter of the Titan Pallas and the river goddess Styx, and in Greek mythology, she was absolutely famous for delivering triumph, both on the battlefield and, fittingly, in the Olympic Games.
And man, that epic mythological power, it perfectly contrasts with the brand's incredibly humble, almost unbelievable beginnings. Because back in 1964, Phil Knight and his former coach, Bill Bowerman, literally started out selling Japanese track shoes right out of the trunk of a car. They called it Blue Ribbon Sports before finally rebranding to Nike in 1971. Okay, moving into Chapter 1, Forging the Moon Shoe. Because believe it or not, this entire juggernaut really kicked off thanks to a completely ordinary kitchen appliance. So picture this. Coach Bowerman is desperately searching for better traction for his runners because of this slippery new urethane track they just installed. One morning, he just goes for it. He pours liquid urethane straight into his wife's prized 1936 wedding gift waffle iron. He completely ruined the iron, obviously, but he sparked an absolute revolution in footwear. And as you can see, that wild kitchen experiment led directly to the 1972 moon shoe. They called it that because the footprints literally looked like astronaut tracks. And that, in turn, paved the way for the 1975 waffle trainer. This release was an absolute blockbuster. It completely transformed what the whole world expected from athletic grip and cushioning. Right. So that brings us to Chapter 2, Designing an Iconic Brand. So the soul is figured out, but now they desperately need a visual identity to go toe-to-toe with those massive European competitors. $35. That shockingly low number is exactly what Portland State student Carolyn Davidson was paid back in 1971 to design the legendary swoosh logo. The idea was that this curved checkmark would mimic the wings and that fluid sense of motion of the goddess Nike herself. But here is the craziest part. Phil Knight wasn't even blown away by it at first. He literally said he didn't love it but thought it might grow on him. He basically accepted it out of necessity. Though, to be fair to Knight, Davidson was later rewarded with 500 shares of stock and a diamond ring for her massive contribution. Of course, the innovation certainly didn't stop with waffle irons. Fast forward to 1979, and former NASA aeronautical engineer Frank Rudy takes the intergalactic knowledge he used on the Apollo missions and brings it down to Earth. He literally put pressurized air membranes, the very first air shock absorption technology, into the 1979 Nike Tailwind. But it was hidden, right? Until 1987. Designer Tinker Hatfield was inspired by the inside-out architecture of the Pompidou Center in Paris, and he makes his radical decision to just cut away the midsole. He took that functional, hidden air bubble from the late 70s and made it entirely visible. Enter the 1987 Air Max 1. And that visible air lineage just became an unstoppable cultural juggernaut. You've got the Air Max 90 with those bold infrared colors, then the 95 designed to mimic human anatomy like ribs and a spine, and the 97 inspired by Japanese bullet trains and water ripples. It seamlessly bridged the gap between high-performance athletic gear and global streetwear culture. Now we have to pivot to Chapter 3, the sweatshop crisis. Because as the 90s approached, the brand's explosive outsourced manufacturing model collided head-on with a very harsh global reality. See, Nike's early strategy was to outsource to the lowest-cost foreign factories, places they didn't actually own. And that backfired spectacularly. In 1996, Life magazine published a totally devastating photo of a child stitching a Nike football. Just like that, the iconic swoosh was visually linked directly to child labor in the minds of the public. And the public backlash? It was absolutely relentless. The company went practically overnight from this celebrated innovator to the poster child for uncaring capitalism. It got so bad that by 1998, Phil Knight was forced to openly and quite bluntly admit the severe damage to the brand's reputation, saying their product had become synonymous with slave wages and abuse. So how do you come back from that? Well, it took years of painful, incredibly expensive corrections. They started publishing their factory locations for full transparency. They implemented strict independent safety audits. They even swallowed a $100 million loss to cancel a contract with supplier Saga Sports in 2006, literally bankrupting them, just to prove to the world they were finally taking these labor violations seriously. Which leads us right into Chapter 4, a sustainable turnaround. Because this massive existential crisis, it actually forced Nike to fundamentally rebuild its corporate soul from the ground up. Fast forward to today, and Nike is using advanced AI tools like Data Marin to map out 14 essential priority ESG issues. We're talking everything from greenhouse gases to labor rights in the supply chain. It's proof that their commitment has evolved way past reactive PR and into rigorous, data-driven science. And if you look at their internal scorecards, it's pretty intense. The board now demands quantitative, measurable results at every single meeting. They track manufacturing, the product itself, the carbon footprint, showing exactly how deeply ingrained the sustainability mission has actually become. It's quite the turnaround. They went from being public enemy number one to the biggest user of recycled polyester in their entire industry, starting back at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Today, under Chief Sustainability Officer Noel Kinder, they're hitting science-based targets and diverting over 1 billion plastic bottles a year from landfills. 1 billion! That's huge. All right, let's bring it all home with Chapter 5, The Price of Victory. It's time to zoom out and look at the big picture of what this entire journey actually means for us as consumers. When you step back and look at this timeline, the grassroots hustle, the unmatched innovation, the horrific controversies, and the eventual redemption, we really have to ask, has the goddess of victory truly earned her wings?
Here's my take. In my opinion, you simply cannot separate the genius of the waffle iron and visible air technology from the dark days of the sweatshop scandals. They are, for better or worse, two sides of the exact same hyper-capitalist coin. That rapid, aggressive growth caused immense harm, yeah, but it's also what funded these groundbreaking, world-changing advancements. But what I find truly remarkable, and where I think their real victory actually lies, is that they had the operational courage to face those darkest failures head-on. They ate massive financial losses and chose to rebuild themselves into a transparent, proactive ESG leader when they easily could have just hidden behind slick PR spin. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. As consumers, we constantly demand both dirt-cheap prices and squeaky clean ethics. But are we truly prepared to recognize the immense, turbulent cost of a major corporation actually growing a conscience? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.